Well, hello again. This is our final recorded lecture for this series of training for Level 1 training with the National Resource Conservation Service. And I look forward to meeting you all in person. I look forward to a dialogue that we can have when we're talking about questions that you might have and interacting about some of the assignments that I've posted just to get you more familiar with some of the tools that we're talking about. In this final lecture, I'm going to return to a topic that I discussed briefly called burning in brakes. And it's a fundamental tool for getting prescribed burning done in Wisconsin in all kinds of environments, not just flat areas where you have vehicle access, but rocky areas, hilly areas, difficult to access areas. And so I'd like to take you through that burning in brake, both because it's a valuable tool, but also because it really illustrates the importance that is inherent in prescribed burning, which is choosing your weather. And it's choosing your weather to match the objectives that you have, the fuels that are there, the experience that you have, and the weather that you have. And we'll focus a fair amount on the weather and how that affects burning in brakes, and we'll go from there. So again, I look forward to talking with you, and we'll share my screen and get on with our presentation. So this concept of burning in brakes is actually a pretty old one, and I really enjoy this picture because I literally looked at this picture for almost 3 decades. It hangs in the at the McKay Visitor Center, and has been there for 30 years almost. And I've always looked at it and said, oh, they're doing prescribed burning at the Arboretum a long time ago. And of course, that is the case. But it was only until I started teaching prescribed burning at the UW-Madison that I realized that this was a picture not just of prescribed burning, but it was a specific picture of actually burning in brakes. So this picture of Aldo Leopold and 3 of his students is from circa approximately 1945. And what I find interesting is that they're burning a nice, beautiful brake in here. You can see that this brake is probably about 10 meters wide, something akin to that, maybe a little bit smaller, maybe about 8 feet wide, something like that. But it's a very nice brake. It's straight. It's removed all the fuel. And as best we can tell from this picture, they've done it with burlap sacks tied to a stick, stuffed with vegetation and soaked in water. And that's the tool that they used in order to, burn in these brakes. And so it is a fairly old technique that people have used for a considerable length of time, but we have, fortunately, from 1945 until now, modified our techniques a little bit. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. And so this is our class from 2021 with the same brakes that we were burning in, approximately the same width of a brake, and using better flappers, using personal preventative, what is it, PPE, protective personal equipment, and pump cans, and helmets and things like that. But basically, we're pretty much doing the same thing, and it's still very much, and even more so, an effective tool. So I'm kind of excited to talk with you about it. It's also a tool that has largely been forgotten since the 1980s. I don't see it practiced very much, and so I'm very interested in teaching people about it because it can be such a worthwhile thing, especially for private landowners doing burns on their land, because it can be done with very simple equipment, and it's a very safe practice, and it can be a very useful thing when people don't have tractors and don't have fancier equipment. The number one rule, and the only really number one or primary rule, is you never burn brakes going with the wind. And so basically when we're burning brakes in one way or another, we're always trying to move in the wind, into the wind, which of course you might recognize now as using a backing fire or at best a flanking fire as we go along. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. You can see in this case, the wind is going in this direction. These people are actually not burning a break, they're putting out a spot fire, but that is tantamount to the beginnings of burning in a break. If you just light the fire and then you just keep it going in a direction you want it to go, putting out the sides. In this case, these 3 students or 4 students, their job is to put out this fire, and so they're starting at a point farthest upwind, which is the backing fire here. They put that out, creating a safe black zone, and then they work this flank and this flank, gradually pinching off this head fire. And that's how safely to put out a spot fire, never going downwind of it. But for our purposes here, it's tantamount to having a burn break and going with the wind, and that's just a bit too risky of a thing to do when you don't have burn breaks otherwise present. So I'm going to go to a publication that Wayne Pauley last distributed in 1988. I think he wrote the publication somewhere in the late 70s or perhaps early 1980s. But literally, I stumbled across Wayne's discussion on burning in breaks when I was very young at the International Crane Foundation and needed to get breaks established and didn't always have mowers that I could use to establish those breaks. And so I read Wayne's book and learned about his techniques and started to burn in breaks using his techniques. And overall, so this covers pages 11 to 14 in Wayne Pauley's 1988 publication, Managing Small Prairie Fires. And it was assigned for you to read before you are listening to this video. If you have not yet read that, I think it would be appropriate for you to stop the video at this point and read those 3 pages or 4 pages. It goes very quickly, and then pick up this video lecture again, because it will make a whole lot more sense if you're actually listening or actually keeping in mind what Wayne Pauley wrote about. So this is a figure directly taken from Wayne's book. And in general, I've never asked Wayne this, and I should ask him at some point, but I get the feeling that Wayne was talking about a basic rhythm of prescribed fire where you would show up in the morning of a prescribed fire, burning your breaks, or finish burning in your breaks, and then do the prescribed burn that afternoon. And so a lot of these break burnings was geared towards burning in the morning weather, which of course the humidity's high earlier in the morning, the dew's still there, so you can burn a lot more safely because conditions are cooler than you can later in the afternoon when we would do regular prescribed fire. The difference is that you are burning in these breaks, and you're burning into environment that has growing dryness and growing heat. What I've learned since starting on burning breaks is it's often a lot safer to flip that around, and that you burn in your breaks at night or in the late afternoon or early evening, and then into the evening itself. You burn in your breaks at that time, because then you're burning into a cooling environment, and you stop basically when you can't be productive with your break burning anymore. And that tends to be quite a bit safer. However, it's not as good of a rhythm, because you're burning in the breaks, a full day before you're going to do your prescribed burn at the shortest turnaround time. And so it kind of separates the activity of break burning from the activity of doing the prescribed burn. So again, I don't know what Wayne's purpose for the rhythm was, but if you're burning in the morning and then do your prescribed burn in the afternoon with the breaks that you had just burned in, at least in part, that can work, but there are inherent risks with that, and things go a little bit slower. Now, the reason why I go into that background is because the way Wayne sets up burning in breaks is pretty conservative, and I think it's conservative because of the fact that you don't have that many breaks available otherwise, other than the water that you're working with. And you therefore need to go kind of slowly in order to put in the breaks safely. And what we'll do when we talk about burning breaks on a more general basis, or burning breaks in the evening, I've added one technique to burn brakes in much more rapidly, and we'll talk about that later. So Wayne posits basically two ways that you burn in a brake. You either burn in a brake with a line that is perpendicular to the direction of the wind, so you're essentially using flank fires and backing fires, or you burn directly into the wind, so you're just clearly using a backing fire. So what I would add to that is when you're burning in the evening, you can burn brakes by doing small ring fires as you're moving along. And I'll explain each of these three steps as we move along, covering first Wayne's two techniques of burning perpendicular to the wind direction and then burning into the wind. So if we take a look at burning perpendicular to the wind direction, the wind is coming from the north in this diagram. And so we are lighting fire that's essentially going back, but basically our fire is going to be moving this way as much as it's moving this way. And so it's sort of perpendicular to the wind direction. So this wavy line is the line of fire that you have here. This is a blackened area already burned. And of course, since this is the downwind line, this is where you're at your greatest risk. And so there's a person with a pump can and a person with a flapper. The person with a rake generally is using it to spread flames. They're using it as a drip torch as opposed to raking in a brake, though a garden rake could be used for both purposes, raking in a brake and or gathering up vegetation and moving it to light a fire. They use a flapper up here because this area is pretty safe because you've got black downwind and you've got black behind that you've already burned. So these brakes are pretty good so that you can not need as much water over here and usually put out the fires with a flapper. So the idea is that you have this line of fire which runs roughly perpendicular to the direction of the wind. Since it's at an angle, it's not quite perpendicular, but it's perpendicular so that you either have a backing fire or a flanking fire for the most part. Now, so this is what you're doing, and you can just let this back burn, and this person just putting out the fire once it gets up to this elevation, and they would creep along this way, keeping the width of this line the same. And these people could keep up with the fire creeping in this direction, which would be as a flanking fire, moving in this direction, and they would move the line that way. And so all they have to do then is maintain this perpendicular line to the wind. Now that works, but it's a fairly slow process, so that the fire is moving at, a foot to 2 feet, per minute. And so that's a pretty slow way of getting a brake burned in, but it's possible and it's very safe to do it that way. You can speed up this process, but still primarily using this technique of burning a brake in perpendicular to the wind direction. And so I'm going to take you through that series of steps now using the same base image that Wayne has provided us in his book. So the first thing that you do, you would extend the line. First putting down a wet line with your water and then lighting along that wet line. So your fire brake is essentially that wet line and you're letting burn the fire going into the wind. And so you're extending that line. But then what you could do, since you've got pretty good brakes back here, what you could do as the next step is you could light a fire coming out like this directly into the wind. So it's a flanking fire as the fire is moving in this direction, perpendicular to the wind. And you could light going this way, or you could choose to stop there, walk over here, and light coming this way. So all of a sudden, this little triangle burns out very rapidly, and you should do it in such a way that the fires won't jump over this brake. If you have very hot conditions, a strip fire could come across here rather than here, so you could do it in 2 steps, step 1, and then step 2. However it works, but you want to make sure that you light fire that is well contained by the brakes that are downwind of it, which is this blackened area. So if we have fairly high relative humidity, we're going to light our brake like this. This area is going to be blackened out. And so now it's black. And then we're going to light, as this is becoming more and more black, we can light another strip fire going and reestablishing our line that's perpendicular to the direction of the wind. So this line is burning, and we can burn that in going that way. So now we've got our perpendicular line again, and we're ready to move. So again, we can put a wet line, come back here, go up and over, and then this is now burning, and then we burn this area out again. So we're moving in this direction. We're keeping, this person's responsibility is to keep an equal line, a width of the black line here. This person's responsibility, besides making sure no fire escapes, is keeping this line straight by following a marker on the horizon or that sort of thing. And so they're keeping their line straight. And there is a purpose for keeping lines straight, other than being German and liking straight lines. The purpose for that is so that you can always look straight down your line and very clearly see if fire is on the correct side of that line and is not on the incorrect side of that line. So the fire is not outside of your unit, it's only inside your unit. Straight lines help you make that assessment. So again, I'm just going to back up. We'll repeat it again. So here you have your line that's roughly perpendicular to the wind direction. You extend your line, you square it off. That creates a fire here, and then you do a strip fire there, and you've got that reestablished perpendicular line, and then you repeat the process. So, and that's what your line of fire is like. So this is a depiction of that sort of thing. We have a line that's approximately the same width. This is about 5 meters wide. The wind is coming like this, and here's our diagonal line going across. We have one person here on this line, and the other person is down here extending this line, and you can see this straight line coming through here, and this straight line coming through here. So this burns out totally. It's a very rocky, and it's a somewhat steep slope, so it's not possible to construct in other ways. And you've got this nice line that's basically moving into the wind and is perpendicular to it. So the second situation that Wayne describes is when you're burning a break directly into the wind. So the wind is moving in an opposite direction to that which you are moving your brake. So now we've got the same, this is still an illustration from Wayne Pauly's book. We have this line that we've been created. So all of this is black, and our two lines, or the two places where we're at the greatest risk of a fire escaping, is equally on either corner of this. So you've got your flames in between, and this is where we're at risk of a fire escaping here, and this is where we're at risk with a fire escaping here. So the person with a pump can is ready to work with this line or with this line. And so you can move this line, these two flappers, keeping the line equidistant, and you're moving this fire into the wind. Now, again, if it's moving into the wind, it's a backing fire, and it's going to go at a rate of 1 to 2 feet every minute to minute and a half, or even 2 minutes. So it's a fairly slow process, but it's a very safe way of creating a burn break. Now, you can speed that up a little bit, but still be very conservative in doing this, and I'll show you what it's like to speed that up. So the first thing is you basically can have fire go up on this side, putting out water here, and have fire going up on this side, putting out water here. And once these two flanks are secure, you do a little strip fire going across, and that burns out this internal area. And then that is black. And then you have, this is your line of fire, and you would do the same thing again. So I'm just backing up to do it. So here, it's not really, you don't do a ring here, but you just do a line here and a line here. Wait to make sure that these brakes are secure. And once they are secure, you can do a line going across here, and that burns out this middle area, and you have that break. So that goes a little bit faster because you're using a strip head fire during parts of the burning, and that allows you to go a little bit faster than a foot every minute or 2 feet every minute. So these are the two strategies that Wayne has put in. You can just let the fire, the most conservative way is to let fire just either back or flank into the wind, and so that goes fairly slowly. You can speed that up during the daytime, is a little less conservative, but it's still quite conservative, of creating small triangles as you're extending your line, or small squares as you're extending your line. And you have a little bit more greater risk because anytime that you're using strip fires, you have greater fire intensity. And so you have a greater chance of fire escaping from the meager breaks that you have when you're burning in your line. All that said, those are real workable solutions. But the thing that's really kind of interesting about burning in breaks is if you choose your weather really well, you can greatly increase your capacity of burning in breaks. So this is what it looks like burning in fairly large breaks at night. And so what you see here is a little confusing at first, but if you look really carefully, it can begin to make some sense for you. So what we've done is we've created an area that's approximately 10 meters by 10 meters, so a square area. And all we've done is we've actually walked a circle around it, and all the fire basically is moving in to the middle of the center. So it's a small version of the ring fire that I demonstrated to you in the previous video. So the fire is going in that direction, the fire is going in that direction, the fire is going in that direction, and it's going in the other direction too. So you're creating these little ring fires. Now the size of those ring fires can be determined by your needs, how big of a break are you creating, as well as by the fuel that you have, the experience and the crew that you have, and what your weather conditions are going to allow. So just to emphasize this, so I'm going to kind of push this to an extreme, and we are in a circumstance where our goals were about as extreme as you're going to get for burning in breaks. And so what we did is I was asked by some colleagues of mine to go to the Russian Far East in a wetland called Muravyovka Park, and it's on the Amur River. And the problem at Muravyovka is that the whole area would burn and burn frequently, but its problem was that it was burning too frequently. And so this 20 square kilometer wetland was burning in its entirety almost every year. And those fires were being caused by surrounding farms burning off their agricultural fields and just allowing those fires. Basically, they'd light their fields on the upwind end and just let their fields burn out, and it would keep burning on past the field and into the neighbor's field or into these wilder areas, of which Muravyovka was one. And so this extensive wildfire was occurring, and Sergey, my colleague, was looking for ways of creating ways to preemptively control these wildfires that were occurring at Muravyovka. And so what we decided to do is we could create a series of fire breaks that you could either stop a fire if the conditions weren't too dry and too windy, or you could at least light a backing fire off of those breaks and would be big enough that you could do it safely, and at the very least have a safe area to work from in this condition where you have extensive wildfires occurring around you. And so this is what Muravyovka looks like. You're basically 20 to 30 miles from the nearest town, even small village. And this area is unbroken grassland of relatively heavy fuel loads. So dominant species here you would recognize as Calamagrostis and Scissorincium and species like that. And so it was very much like our wet prairies to dry mesic prairies, basically, was what this vegetation was. But there was, miles and miles and miles of this. And so we are trying to, our goal was to go through this and create a fire break, but the soil was wet. You couldn't get a tractor into it. It was a very large scale. There's absolutely no other breaks around, so you couldn't use roads very well or things like that. And so it was a really kind of a challenging circumstance. And so that's the environment. These two pictures just give you different views of Muravyovka. They're pretty much the same, but just a very broad expanse with some copses of woods that were on islands that were just slightly elevated higher. And that's what we had to work with. And what we came up with which were techniques to create these fairly large fire breaks moving through these areas. And these are just two examples of that. These are two different pictures. And each of these breaks are a full 20 to 30 meters wide and very long. Some of the longest ones were 2 kilometers long. And you can see, and I'm German and all that, so you can see a nice and straight line so that you can predict what fire behavior is going to do along these lines. And you can look down those lines to see if you have trouble in any place and all kinds of good advantages like that. So that's what our goal was, is to create these broad fire breaks at Moraviovka. And I just want to kind of share a little bit of how that pertains to this whole idea of burning in breaks and how you can increase your effectiveness as well as your efficiency. We have a lot of purposes. We don't have a lot of places that are like Moraviovka in Wisconsin, but we do have a lot of places where we need fire breaks to be created, and we can't necessarily mow them. We can't necessarily plow them. We can't necessarily rake them all. And so in the driftless area, for example, one place that we have frequently are these areas of high quality wetlands, or high quality prairies on these south and southwest facing slopes. And these areas have endemic insects in those areas, endemic at least to, I should say, remnant dependent insects or invertebrates that are in these areas, but they're also far enough apart from each other that they may no longer be linked. And so you have to pay particular attention. And the prairies up on these bluffs, for example, can be very different than the prairies down here on the flatlands. These prairies down here were former agricultural areas that have had plants, native plants, re-invade into this area. And so they're not at all the same kinds of prairie vegetation that are up on these slopes. And so you can have units with some areas that are burned and other areas that are not burned, for example. You can do the same thing with woods, some areas that are burned and some areas that are not burned. And this is a real burn unit that we have in southern Sauk County, for example. And this is about 100 acres in size. And so you can burn most of these areas and you're just fine because you have places where invertebrates can re-invade from in the surrounding areas, and the same thing in the woods. But for these isolated prairie remnants, you don't have any other place where insects may be able to invade from if you burn this whole area. And we want to burn this whole area because that's a way of increasing our efficiency and getting more fire on the ground safely and effectively. So there's this conundrum. We want to burn more. We want to get a lot more burning done, and yet we have to do no harm while we're getting more burning done. And burning in breaks is an important tool in trying to find a way to resolve those sorts of circumstances. So especially in the driftless area, but often in many areas in Wisconsin where we have these tiny isolated remnants, you have a circumstance where you need to put in fire breaks where it's fairly difficult to get them in through mechanical means. So this just gives you one idea at the Sauk Prairie Recreation Area of what a refuge area, a no-burn refuge area looks like in the middle of doing a prescribed burn. You can see that this no burn refuge area is not burning, so that's a good thing. We've got fire all around it. If you look real carefully, you can see the width of the original fire break because we burned it at slightly different humidities. And so I'm just lighting this fire here, and this is the width of it. And this is the width of the break here. It's slightly browner vegetation because it was higher humidity. We burned it in at night. And you can see the width of that fire break going along here and so on. So all of this break we put in up like this, and then of course all the way across here. We put in the night before we did this prescribed burn. It was very easy to do. It took us approximately a half an hour to burn in this break, and the break itself is about a 1/4 acre in size. And it's a very safe area. There's a photographer who is interested in photographing fire, so they're working in this area and are in a safe area because they're in the black. And you can see I'm lighting around it to mingle what we're burning in the prescribed burn unit with the outer perimeter of this burn. And every time that we've used this refugia, we've never had a problem with it burning unintentionally. And it does complicate the type of burn that we're doing, because you can see that I'm having to think through, how am I lighting this fire? This is a flanking fire, this is a backing fire, but I can't light and go this way, because all of a sudden then I'm lighting a head fire that's going to go this way. And so I'm going to light here and stop, then I'm going to walk and come over here and light again and come back this way. So you got to kind of think through, how am I going to light around this refugia? Because anytime your brakes change direction, you have a change in fire behavior. But you also have to think about, well, how am I going to link this fire to this fire in such a way that I'm not challenging the brakes on the edge of the unit, that I'm not lighting fire that could jump my perimeter brakes or things like that. So creating refugias are important. Using burned-in brakes are a valuable tool to accomplishing that, but there's no free lunch. And the bottom line with that is that it's a more complicated process to do. Both the burning in the brakes adds complexity, as does how do you light around those no-burn refugias in the middle of a prescribed burn. But as far as burning in brakes goes, two of us basically put in this brake in 30 minutes time by burning at, we burned from about 7 to 8 p.m. The evening previous to burning this fire. And so it was really pretty easy to do and a very safe sort of thing. Just a couple of other examples where we have refugias. This is at the International Crane Foundation. And so we burned this unit. We did an overflight that this is in April. And so we had just burned this. This was one no-burn refugia here and another no-burn refugia here. This no-burn refugia is in a patch of leer-leaved rock cress where there's literally thousands of plants. And we have Olympia marble butterflies that are dependent upon those leer-leaved rock cress. And so we leave approximately 2/3 of our area out from being burned. And we burned this unit the previous year. And when we burned in the previous year, all of this got burned, but this was a no-burn refugia in the previous year. And we came in the next year and burned the no-burn refugias. So no-burn refugias, in our mind, don't necessarily mean that you've not ever burned them. It just means that you don't burn them at the same time that you're burning the rest of the unit. This is a fair amount of work to come in and burn these in the next year, and it makes you having to burn in this unit 2 years in a row. And so what I now do is, for example, this is my no-burn refugia. The next time I burn this, I might make this as my no-burn refugia. So I'm burning some of the areas that we burned this year, and for the, I'll burn some of this, whereas we didn't in this particular year. And then the year following, I'll maybe do that. This is the no-burn refugia. So, over, say, 9 years, all of this no-burn refugia will burn at least once, but at a different rotation. So that way I only have to burn once in that unit whenever I'm going to burn it, say, every 3 years. But you get the drift. But this is a very rocky soil, and so it's very difficult to mow in these areas. And burning in this means that I'm managing my entire area with prescribed fire, even though I'm creating no-burn refugias in that. And you can see the yin and the yang, basically, of those two circumstances. So basically, where you want to burn in brakes is going to be where mowing is either not safe or not practical. And this gives you a little bit of an idea. We're burning on a steep bluff. This is actually one of the remnants. In fact, I'll go back and show you. This is a remnant. This is up on the top of this remnant here. And so it's not a place where you can easily get a mower to. And even if you could get a mower, it would be risky to actually burn on that brake, because it quickly gets very steep where you can't burn. And there's a lot of rocks and stumps that are in this area, which are problematic for burning as well. So these are a mild example of where you can't burn. And just to give you a more extreme example, for reasons that I won't go into here, we needed to burn some of this a prairie remnant on a bluff area, but not other parts. So this was a no burn area, and this was the area that we're going to burn. So we have two crews that are burning in breaks down the middle of this bluff, and you can see the degree of steepness that we have here in terms of how steep this is. And working with this is approximately 7 o'clock at night, so the humidity is already up quite a bit. You can see that there's pretty extensive flame lengths, but we're able to control this because the humidity is getting higher. We have a nice straight line coming down this bluff, and we're working right next to an old fence line that's right here. So you can use this technique in very difficult to otherwise move environments. Now, if you think about it, there is a pretty important reason why it would be even easier and safer to do this if we waited until night time to do it. And that is true as far as fire behavior goes. But there's competing risk assessments here. One is how safe is your fire behavior, which is becomes safer as you get further into the evening and relative humidity gets higher. And the other is how safe is your crew if they're carrying 50 pounds of water on their back on a steep slope and there's all kinds of stumps and rocks that they can slip on. And so being able to see is of equal importance for safety as being able to control your fire. And so we chose that sweet spot of basically 6:30 p.m. to about 7:30 p.m. to burn these breaks in. And so as a way to kind of balance out those two different risk assessments. But the bottom line is you can use this tool pretty much anywhere where your two legs can go. So just to refresh and come back at how effective this can be, you can use tiny little breaks in heavy fuels as a fire break, as we're doing here when you have high humidity. But by creating these small ring fires, and you can actually see this is where we did a ring fire, and the next ring fire came all the way down here. So by the end of the night, we were doing ring fires that were 30 meters by 20 meters or so, and letting that just burn in on itself. And so this line, this is basically a 20 to 30 meter wide line, and it went for 2 kilometers. 3 of us put in this break with 3 cans of water and 2 drip torches and 2 flappers one evening. And so think about that. It's a 30-meter wide area, 2 kilometers long, nice and straight, burning off the vegetation, and it's 30 meters wide. And so that's basically 30 meters wide is about 100 feet. And so it's not going to stop all head fires, but it certainly gives you an opportunity to have a place where you can safely work. And you could light fires off of this if you needed to, and you know where you're going if you're at night, by knowing where you are in this black area. So it's just got tremendous potential. And then, so these breaks were very important in being able to begin to control wildfires that were occurring at Moraviovka. And there's really very little other ways. You can't plow this or mow this, at least in all years. You can mow it when the wetland is dry, but the wetland often is not dry. And so the only predictable way that you can accomplish these management objectives is through burning in breaks. And if you pick your weather right, you can get an awful lot done in an evening with 3 people in the middle of nowhere, is the bottom line. Now, if you were doing this in the middle of the day, you couldn't get more than maybe 2 of those rings completed at 30 by 30 meters. And you would run out of water and run out of energy and probably even lose the fire. So the difference between, the appropriate weather, it might be appropriate weather to do a prescribed burn, but that is not necessarily appropriate weather to do to burn in a break. And so your challenge is that you have to think very carefully about what your exact objective is, and is the weather that you are looking for appropriate for the activity that you're going to do. And in the case of burning in breaks, the more you wait until the evening, the more rapid that you can move, the larger the area that you can cover can be. It's real easy to do a straight line, not using flashlights, but you just look. In fact, I remember distinctly this one tree I could pick out on the horizon, and that's exactly what this line went to, is this tree. And then all I had to do to keep this line straight is I kept this line straight on that tree, and then I just paced out 30 meters when I came across, and then came back to the fire over here. So it was really easy to create pretty much uniform distances as we walked along, just using dead reckoning basically, and choosing our weather well. So to emphasize this point, and again, to reiterate, the normal Midwest prescription for a broadcast prescribed fire is as follows. So these, you've already had these data and you've seen them. And the primary thing is 32 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, 20 to 60% relative humidity, 3 to 15 miles an hour in a grassland, or 5 to 20 miles an hour in a forest, mixing height, transport winds, minimum days since the last rain, and so on. So this is what you want for the objective of doing a prescribed burn generally in the Midwest. For burning in breaks at night, you have a very different prescription. It's much more restricted, isn't the right word, because you can go outside of it, but it is much narrower in the kinds of weather that you're looking for. So a relative humidity of 50 to 70% is much better. You can burn breaks through Phragmites, you can burn breaks through cattail, you can burn breaks through reed canary grass at these higher humidities, because you're using fire behavior and your knowledge, growing knowledge of fire behavior, to understand how that's going to operate when you've got a lot of moisture in the vegetation as opposed to when you don't have much. Temperature doesn't matter so much, but key is you want 0 to 5 miles an hour in a grassland. Above 5, and the wind gets a little bit too strong, and what you're really trying to do is create a condition where the fire quickly pulls in on itself. And unlike in a prescribed burn where you want stronger and directional winds, in this case, a calm wind is perfectly fine, because as long as you get the vegetation burning, you can ring it and it will pull in on itself. So you're allowing the fire to create its own wind. And so not having much ambient wind is a really good idea. So 0 miles an hour is great, but you can burn up to about 5 miles an hour at ground level in a grassland and be effective. And in forests, you can do the same thing, but you can have slightly higher wind speeds because the forests are already tamping down those wind speeds. So wind and relative humidity are two big changes. There's no natural direction of the wind that is better than another. And importantly, you're not generating much smoke. And so you're not worried about smoke rising. You're not worrying about necessarily where your smoke's going to go. So mixing height isn't very important, and transport winds aren't very important. Minimum number of days since the last rain are still relevant, because you still got to get this stuff to burn. So a half a day in sands, a day for a prairie, or 2 to 3 days in savanna. The main point is you usually, not always, but you usually find these conditions at night or late enough in the evening, say from 7 p.m. on, where you can do this work pretty easily. So that is what I wanted to share with you about burning breaks, and it's as much about focusing on this overall philosophy of prescription in the prescribed burns, and choosing very consciously what weather is going to help you achieve your specific objectives the best. And learning about burning in breaks is one way to push that to a very precise level, and seeing just how effective you can be in deploying this really valuable tool that doesn't take much time to implement, can be done safely, and achieves your conservation goals much more readily. Now, lots of places, if you're dealing with CRP fields, it's easier for a farmer to go out and mow around their field, or for a private landowner to do the same if they've got their Kubota, out there, and they would prefer to mow it, and that's perfectly fine. But there are lots of places where you can't get that mower, and there's lots of private landowners who don't have mowers, and there's lots of places where those mowers aren't going to work, such as in wetlands, or such as in rocky areas, or such as in areas that have a lot of stumps, or you name it. And in these cases, burning in brakes can work exceptionally well. So I hope you find these recorded videos of interest to you. I look forward again to meeting you and speaking with you, and I look forward to we'll try to do a collective Zoom sessions where we're going to allow you guys time to ask questions and talk about your assignments to see what you've learned from doing those, and we'll go from there. So thank you for your time, and I look forward again to meeting you. Bye-bye.